Make sure the live stream is happening. Okay. The first thing, I'm going to go over a little bit of the syllabus and just the so whats. You guys have had me before. A reminder for those of you here in person or the live stream, starting, and I'm going to send out an email reminder, starting next week at 8:30, we get rolling. If you're running late, no big deal. Watch it on your phone, go in the computer lab and watch the live stream, or just watch it later. But once my little hamsters get going, interruption for me is just hard to kind of get back on track. Y'all have had me before. You know, I teach with analogies and examples, and so I'm not just reading from a PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm going to give it a grace period because I understand. But starting next Wednesday, we'll kind of start that day. What I love about the hybrid class, good morning. What I love about the hybrid class is it allows me to be the teacher that I am. Not perfect, but I have a certain style. It allows learners, if you're a face-to-face learner, come on. I'm going to be here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, unless we have a holiday or unless, an emergency. But I take my job very serious. I'm here to be an in-person teacher. However, I understand sometimes things happen. Some students have families, some students have work, some students have jobs. So that's why we're live streaming it. So for other learners, they can watch it later on in the day. You can rewatch it. So you never have to be like, oh my gosh, I missed one class, I'm going to be behind for 2 weeks. Okay. So it really does give you the flexibility of, how you want. It's like a kinesiology Piccadilly. You kind of pick and choose how you want to learn. So let's go over a couple things that are going to be a little modification from the last time I taught. Nothing crazy, but all of these modifications are meant to help you. Okay. My office hours are kind of standard office hours for my boys. I do have a new office. I'm tucked away in the corner off of the main interstate. Hopefully that'll be less distraction. Office hours in the morning, I'm here super early. So if you do need to come early, my boys, my two boys go to a school for their dyslexia, and they let off at 1 o'clock every day. So my job is to give my boys. So that's why I'm usually not here in the afternoon. However, you have my cell phone, and if anybody ever took advantage of it, if you're studying and you have a question, I don't want that question to linger until the next day. Text me, Dr. Campbell, I'm in this class, I have a question about, and we'll talk, or I can answer it so that you can keep studying. I don't want that to be a roadblock in your understanding. Now, night before test, I may or may not reply. You text me after 10 p.m., I'm texting you at 4 in the morning, all right? So just kind of use it. But that's the intent, is so that if you're studying and you have a clarification question, I don't want you to be like, oh gosh, the only time I ever have a chance to get something clarified is this. This is just literally where I'm in my office, usually converting oxygen into carbon dioxide. But you have open access if you have questions, okay? All right, let's get to how we're going to make some grades. I am instituting an optional cumulative final. Optional. So in other words, we're going to have 3 main tests, but I'm going to add questions to each test. So in other words, technically, we're going to have more questions than we would if we'd have had 4. Guys, the end of the semester, every beginning of the semester, everybody's fresh. Everybody's like Matt Foley from Saturday Night Live, van down by the river, excited. But by the end of the semester, bro, we all in the same boat. We exhausted, we tired. You got projects due, you got finals due. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 3 main units to test you guys in. If you have an A after those units, go spend your time on other classes or sleep. I don't care. You have a B, take it if you want it. If you have a C, take it if you want it. Go celebrate and graduate. If you take your 3 tests, your average, obviously it's thirds, right? It's 33% each. If you choose to take the cumulative final during finals week, then it becomes fourths. It just becomes 25%. I'm going to protect my A's. I'm going to protect my B's. I'm going to help with C's. A majority of the class should make a C. That's what a distribution is. So you could either have a 65 overall average for a C, or if you pass one of your first 3 tests with a 65 or above, and then you get another chance on your cumulative final. Show me you know some stuff. Guys, I'll round you past 30. Okay? Fair enough? Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward. It is a little different, but again, it's meant to help you. And as you know, like exam week is literally almost kind of a wasted week. We have a review on Monday, we take the test, nobody wants to learn new stuff on Friday. So to me, this will also allow us more time to learn some hopefully cool stuff, okay? Sarah Stamey is here. She is doing her internship in biomechanics. She's considering being a professor one day, and she loves biomechanics. I don't mean to speak for you. Maybe it was all a lie, you know. But she was kind of instrumental this summer with a group of former students that have had this class to kind of restructure some things, collapse some things. My favorite dessert was humble pie. You know, I had to look in the mirror and kind of say, you know, man, maybe I'm beating that dead horse a little bit too much on some concepts. So I'll let Sarah introduce herself. Maybe she could talk a little bit about what things she enjoyed about the class, things that and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to take my water, not spill it this class, and let you kind of introduce yourself to everybody on YouTube.
Hey y'all, a lot of y'all look familiar from 310 last semester, so hey again. Biomechanics is different than 310 in the example that you're going to see the movements again, and like we're going to have to be doing the same stuff with contraction and terms likewise, but with biomechanics we're also going to be taking it a step further, introducing muscles and the way that they pull and how we analyze motion with their help and what they're doing. But before even that, we're going to talk more about like physics behind biomechanics, like the mechanical side and with the biology side. And that's something that I love personally. I was never a chemistry biology girl. I was always a biology physics girl. So this first test with all the concepts and the terms, it was exciting to me. So that's kind of what pulled me into biomechanics. And then actually having a class where we did like a lab and we had that hands-on experience of seeing it in person, that was really fun. I will say if in 310, like those illusions that we had, and then like, for example, some people don't always understand the wall moving about the smaller wall and stuff, you know, like if that went over your head, sometimes it's hard to understand like the laws of motion or like Newton's laws. So glad you brought that up. Keep talking. So like, for example, whenever we get to the third law, if I'm touching the desk is touching me back. That's not always easy to understand because the desk is not a person, it can't touch, but it feels what I'm feeling. So there's a lot of things to like, you have to kind of like just accept and swallow and try to understand it the best that you can because it might not make sense. Yeah. And not everything from 310 made sense the first time you learned it, right? Like you kind of had to like do it a bunch of times to like really feel it out.
Yeah. Most of the physics classes you guys have taken have never really applied it to the human body, right? It's always bridges and trusses and boxes and stuff, right? So applying it to us hopefully makes it more understandable. Like just the analogies, like hopefully it'll be like, oh, that's what that physics teacher is trying to say. Because once we can apply it to ourselves, I think we can kind of better feel and understand what some of these concepts are. To Sarah's point too, look what I posted on there. Your entire 310 materials from last semester updated. If you need them, review, illusions, and also to Sarah's point too, just like we had 310 illusions, Sarah brought up, there's going to be biomechanical physics illusions, like the law of action reaction isn't a motion law, even though it sounds like. Like think about it, you think of and action, and there's movement. But the law of action reaction is actually a force concept. Like she said, if you feel the desk has no other choice but to feel you back. You have to feel each other. I'm not touching the desk, it's not touching me back. I'm barely touching the desk, it's barely touching me back. I'm significantly touching the desk, it's significantly touching me back. It's actually about forces and feeling each other's influence. So just little things like that, just like in 310, that we kind of get embedded in our brains, and then the bell rings and we want to salivate kind of this basic definition of it. But the reality is sometimes it may be, and I'm not saying it's like the polar opposite, but just sometimes it may not be exactly what we think it is. But hopefully, again, since we're going to apply it to a lot of ourselves, hopefully it'll help clear up some of those concepts. Tell them about the fun stuff. Well, no, the physics is fun, but tell them about the real fun stuff in this class.
that's kind of what me and a group kind of worked on over the summer. Was what I'm understanding is everything that you're going to be learning is not what I had exactly last semester, because some of the more challenging maybe or harder to grasp concepts, he's kind of made them more basic. I don't want to say dumbed down, but made them easier to swallow, kind of. And we won't go into as much detail on them so that we can get to the fun stuff.
So that I can ask you harder questions.
Right, exactly. And but more questions, so more of an opportunity to do better. But the fun stuff about this class is the muscles, and it is applying that stuff from 310 that you learned, like the pulleys and the levers and the turns and stuff. Like you had that in 310 there. You had that with the planes and the axes, like that first time in translation and all that stuff. Y'all remember that? Y'all took it. But the fun stuff, if you allowed it to be fun, was doing the movements, was like having to get up on the test and like actually having to do it, and then not stressing yourself out as well. You get to do that, but you're also learning the muscles. So if you have a PT kind of route coming up, you're learning it now so that it's fun later on, kind of, is what I'm trying to explain. Like you're still going to be getting up on the test instead of moving. And I find that fun. I don't know if y'all do. I might just be weird.
Our job is to make it fun. Whether you think of it as this is not, but you're a kinesiology major, you're studying human movement. And one thing you're going to hear me say ad nauseum, skeletal muscles influence joint motion through the context of muscle contraction. Guys, that's everything. Dr. Nels Madsen, the guy who did Gollum, Lord of the Rings, I've talked about it before, he used to humbly say, I don't really know much. I just know Newton's second law, and just apply it in many ways. In our world, skeletal muscles influence joint motion through muscle contraction. And there's so many variables. There's a lot of different muscles. There's a lot of different motions. And there's 3 types of contractions. So when you put all those variables together, there's a lot of different options, right? But just like in 310, how I taught you to see things from the perspectives, we're going to teach you this as well. And hopefully, to me, my students, as a badge of honor, can truly understand eccentrics, concentrics, because guys, you're going to need to know that when you're working in therapy, athletic training, even personal training. Like sometimes there's going to be, okay, this specific type of problem, whether it's a palsy, whether it's an injury of any kind, like certain exercises may be indicated or contraindicated for certain types of contractions. Like you may need to set up the environment to just do concentric stuff. You may need to set the environment to just do eccentric stuff. And so we have to be able to identify who's working and how they are working, okay? We're not here to guess, and it can be confusing, but that's our job, is to try to review that. Anything else, Sarah, before we get rolling? Cross section. Can you give them a little heads up about the not how it works, but like
the 2D,
the cross sectional anatomy of muscle function, the circles.
Okay, yeah.
Has anybody ever heard about the infamous circles? Cross-sectional circles. Some people love it, and some people like, I'm never going to test you on it, but I'll let, what I mean by that is I'm never going to make you write them for a test. At the end of the day, it's just understanding muscles and their function. But I'll let kind of Sarah give you a little heads up on it, because you're going to have some on your first test.
Okay, so it's kind of hard to, if you've never seen or heard about that, it's hard to, yes, okay, thank you. It's basically, whenever we get to the muscles, you'll see this. And that's a 2D picture of it, right? But if we turn it on its side and place it in our neck, that's what.
What's your neck?
This is the center, that circle in the middle is the center of our neck. So what he's talking about is on the test, whenever we have muscles and he's asking functions and stuff, this is a very, very good tool to memorize the way that they pull and the names. Like, yes, they're abbreviated, but he's not going to throw you a loop on the test. If you understand the way that it's going to pull, you'll know the name of it, because sometimes you get lucky and the name's in the pull, or the pull's in the name, I mean. But some people did not choose to do this on the test. I was a circle girl, so like sometimes if we were being good, maybe he'd give us 5 minutes before the test would start, and we would be able to make our list or our circles. And the people that did list, if you scroll down, it's literally just a list of what they are and what they do and all their functions. You can do this, but I don't think that it's as beneficial because you're not seeing the way it pulls. Like if you understand that that is here, then you can understand seeing the movement on the test because it's the same pictures from 310, not the exact same. But now we're just asking what's the muscle attached doing that job.
And there's also redundancy here.
Right.
So what I mean by that is like, you'll notice like that function is listed twice. That function is listed twice. In other words, some muscles, like if we did who are the cervical flexors, if we have these two muscles, who are the extensors, these two muscles, who are the right level, you'll be like, whoa, that one's working with this one and it's not working with that. You kind of get confused. All of that information I'm going to teach you, you can literally visually see on how those muscles cross the joints themselves. So you can literally visually see how they're going to pull. And so you only have to think of it once. And it's Dr. George taught this concept. If you were going to say how many people can you name in class, you're probably not going to go off of a memorized list. Well, who sat in front of me? Who sat to the right of me? Who sat in the back of me? Like spatial relationship works well with us. Like if I had to list all the positions on a football field or a baseball field, I'm not literally going to I'm going to visualize the field and say, well, I got a wide receiver, I got a tight end, I got a right tackle, left tackle, I got a left fielder, a center field. Like I'm visualizing how the players are at. And so it's very similar. Every joint in the body is somewhat circular. I mean, maybe my circles are a little bigger than others, but just it's somewhat circular. And within that joint, those muscles cross and they pull in certain directions. So I'm going to teach you how to be able to visually look at them to say the right sternocleidomastoid is a flexion puller because it crosses in the front. It's a right lateral bending puller because it crosses on the right side. And it's a left transverse because it pulls your neck in the direction left. And obviously, we're going to look at the muscles. And because sometimes it's kind of weird to think, well, a right pulls to the left. It's like, has your mom ever taken your right ear and yanked it forward? Yes, make you want to look to the left. Right? So it's not like we're not going to look at the muscles. But in terms of the so what does a muscle do? How does it pull? The cross-sectional approach can be very useful to some students. All right, let's get going. So Sarah, at any time, please interject. Guys, this is unit 1. All of the stuff that's going to be on your first test is all up on there. And to Sarah's point, I'm really going to try to not over-explain stuff, keep it basic. I'm going to emphasize, hey, here's the take-home point. Here's what you're going to have to know. Here's what I'm going to ask you or how I'm going to ask you, okay? The main thing with biomechanics is to break it down into its component parts, right? It's mechanical principles, but applied to biological systems. We're biological systems, but there's horse biomechanics, dog biomechanics, butterfly in fact, sometimes by studying other animals, we help our own innovations, looking at how dragonflies fly and bees and that kind of cool stuff. So I've had friends who work in veterinary biomechanics, horse biomechanics, prosthetics and orthotics is a type of biomechanical skill set as well. But I love this diagram because this tells you everything you need to know about what goes in to this big area of biomechanics. We have forces and we have motion, cause and effect. And in forces, we call that kinetics, the kinetic chain, right? And movement, we call kinematics. Now that's like Keith and Keith, my twin friends that I've mentioned in 310, they look nothing alike, but their names sounded alike, so people would confuse them, but not because of their looks, because of their names. Kinetics, kinematics, it sounds similar. Kinetics is force stuff. Gravity and friction and pushes and pulls. And kinematics is motion stuff, position, velocities, accelerations, cause and effect. Kinematics is watching and describing the golf ball traveling through the air, right? How fast did it leave the club? What's the angle? How far did it go? It's accelerate, all that stuff. Kinetics is, well, what made the ball travel that far, right? The impact of the club, the wind resistance, gravity. So it's just, what is the conversation? Forces influence motion. I'm always going to try to bring it back to muscles. Forces influence motion. Skeletal muscles influence joint motions through muscle. You got to see where I'm going with, right? So muscles would be like kinetic conversations, forces, weights, dumbbells, machines, force variables. And then the kinematics would be your form, the motion that's happening. Maybe we need to lighten up the weight. Right? So analyzing people's motion is a kinematic conversation, analyzing the forces that go into those motions or kinetics. Within each world, this is 310 review. Translation and rotation, right? Remember that? So we can have a linear conversation about motion stuff, straight line position, where are you at, straight line velocity, how fast you're going, straight line acceleration, what is the rate of speeding up or slowing down. And then we can also have rotational conversations. You're on a merry-go-round. Where are you at on the merry-go-round? How fast are you spinning on the merry-go-round? Most of the time when I'm trying to spin my boys on the merry-go-round, it's make us go faster. So this is a lot of our joint stuff. It's going to be angular. Angular position. Those of you in clinics, you do range of motion stuff, right? With goniometry, that's angular position. Angular velocity is how fast a joint is rotated. And angular acceleration would be the rate at which that joint is speeding up or slowing down. So imagine like a sprinter. They're going to just be cycling between flexion and extension, but you got to speed the flexion up, you got to slow the flexion down, you got to speed the extension up, you got to slow the extension down. So that's this. In kinetics, so this was motion stuff. Linear, forces, pushes, pulls, gravities, pretty straightforward. This is the one that I think some students had a tough time with. When we're talking about rotational influences, we talk about torque or moment. Torque and moment are the same thing. Torque is usually used by engineers. Moment is usually used by biomechanists. Has anybody ever heard of a moment arm? Right? Moment arm, a lever, right? So it's not the weight, it's the moment for us. Practical examples before we get into more context. I could have 20-pound dumbbells, but it feels a heck of a lot more than 20 pounds when I have them out to my side, right? The weight was the same. Like the weight of the dumbbells in my arm is the exact same. So why is it tougher when it's out to the side? Well, because as I abduct, that weight gets more and more and more perpendicular to my shoulder, and thus the moment changes, the torque changes. It's the same weight, but as we change the moment, we change the rotational influence. The further away I push from the hinge of the door, the easier it is for the door to open. As I push closer and closer and closer to the hinge, it gets harder and harder and harder to open. It has nothing to do with my push force. It's the moment, it's the rotation. Okay? I think kinesiologist was like, all of that stuff is that, right? The combination of all this. Is there anything to interject? Again, trying to keep it simple.
That was simple. That's good.
That was simple. We'll move it. All right, guys, scalars and vectors. The so what of this is that sometimes in biomechanics, direction matters. And sometimes in biomechanics, direction doesn't matter. Where are you going, or giving someone directions? You kind of have to know where you're at. Like, direction matters. You don't just say, oh, get on the interstate and go 50 miles. East, west, direction matters. So all this is that there's some times where direction doesn't matter, and sometimes direction matters. In biomechanics, when we're going to look at taking into account all the different forces that are influencing a person, heck, in coaching, direction matters all the time. When you're trying to correct someone's form, don't you apply, you got to push more up, down, front, right? Like you're trying to apply, you're giving direction to those forces, direction to those motions. And that's really the only difference between scalars and vectors is direction. $100 by itself as a magnitude is just a scale. A scalar is just an amount. Direction is who owns that $100 bill. Is it yours? Is it mine? The direction of it matters. And what we're going to find out is in biomechanics, things are transactional. Meaning that, especially to Sarah's point of Newton's third law, like if I write you a check, it's impossible for me to lose the 100 and you not to gain the 100. Like it's transactional. The magnitude is the same, but the direction of the transaction has to be positive, right? I give you 100, I lost you 1, but it's still 100 volts. So the magnitude of the 100 would be scalar. The transactional direction is what makes it vector. Just fancy terms, but really kind of simple concepts. Oh, looky, check this in. All right, guys, this is in here for, again, the so whats. Equations can be very intimidating, but really any equation, complex or simple, it's just a relationship. It's just a relationship between variables. If you're drawing a bath and the water's too hot, you're going to mess with one of the knobs and it's going to adjust, right? As you move one, something happens to. I can make the water hotter by just moving the cold nozzle. Like I don't have to move the hot, right? By affecting one, it affects the overall. And so that's what equations at their heart are. And obviously we're working off to F is equal to ma and some of those basic equations. But an equation is just that, hey, everything on the left side has to be the same as everything on the right side, including direction. So if x is equal to 20 and y is equal to 4, z has to be 5 to make it the same. Well, if x drops to 10, 10 can't equal 20. So to make 10 equal 10, I gotta mess with the stuff on the right side. I gotta mess with the with the hot or the cold water to make it the same. So I either gotta increase one or I gotta decrease the other. So we're going to talk about how we can alter variables, how we can compensate for things. If we got to keep the water warm and you're turning the hot down, maybe we got to affect the cold. You know, it's just how things influence each other. But any equation is just a relationship between variables. And Sarah will tell you, I'm more interested in us seeing how variables affect other variables than I'm solving for an equation. Guys, I don't care if you can solve for an equation. You do the equation, you put in the numbers and you get them out. What does that mean? I'd rather us understand how different variables affect other variables, because then you can take that into the real world and understand, how do I affect friction? How do I make it more? How do I make it less? How do I affect somebody's form? How do I make it easier? How do I make it harder? How different variables affect other variables. So this is an example. 20 has to equal 20, so if 4 goes up to 10, 5 has to go down to 2. As that goes up, this has to go down. It's inversely proportional. So again, the main thing in this class, guys, is understanding concepts and how different factors affect other factors, and not necessarily just putting in a bunch of numbers and solving for something. All right, let's start off with torques and moments. And Sarah can attest. On the test, I'm going to tell you what's important, and I'm literally pulling. The application stuff, once we get into the muscle stuff, is a lot easier to kind of vary from, but this is just definitions. It's just definitions, making sure we're on the same page. Forces and moments and torques, okay? Types of forces, pushes, pulls, spring force. We're never going to use that in class, guys. But an example of it would kind of be like maybe how your arch gives you some return, right? Or some energy return from being distended, and it has elasticity, so it can come back. Like you're getting some free energy. Shoe design, spring energy might be very important for some of you that work with shoe design to try to get some return on that energy, okay? But the main ones that really influence our day-to-day frictional forces are huge. For those of you that do like baseball and football, drag from the air, you know, that's why the spin rate and those kind of things are so important, right? Because there's drag of the air. Normal force, I don't know why they call it normal, it's kind of abnormal, but that's almost kind of like just a reaction. If it's literally like the push back up on something. We call it normal. I've been diagnosed with abnormal forces. I don't think there's medicine for that. These are the really ones that are weird. So the non-contact forces, magnetism, we're not going to be dealing with that. The strong and the weak nuclear, nerd alert, we're not going to be dealing with that. But we are going to be dealing with gravity, right? Specifically gravity from planet Earth. The planet literally is trying to bring us to its center. So gravitational force is going to be one that we're going to be on. See, old Brian would try to explain how gravity works, but it's just weird. And like you go down a rabbit hole of warping space and time, and I think the correct answer is we ain't got time for that. So we're just going to say magic. It just happens. All right, guys. This is moment, angular kinetics, rotational forces. Just because a force and influence is being applied to something doesn't mean it's trying to spin it. Okay? If I go to a merry-go-round and push as hard as I can into the axis of the merry-go-round, all I'm trying to do is shift the merry-go-round. It's not going to go anywhere, right? I'm going to be the lamest dad in the world, right? You have to apply your force at a specific angle that's perpendicular to your force application and the axis of rotation. That is how muscles influence motion, is through torque or moment. In other words, any muscle that's influencing joint motion can't be pushing into the axis of rotation. Well, if the door is a rigid link, an arm or a leg, I can't have a muscle influence here to make the door open or close. It has to be a certain distance from the bone. Now, that doesn't mean muscles don't pull into the axis of rotation. In fact, they go at angles. But the part of the muscle that's trying to push into the axis of the merry-go-round is a stabilizing component of its pull. Remember how I said last class, like muscles don't just influence our motion? Very important to keep articulating surfaces together. Imagine having very, very heavy dumbbells and you're just holding the dumbbells there. What's preventing your ulna from pulling out of your humerus? What's preventing your humerus from pulling out of your glenoid fossa? Like muscles. So there are some linear components to those muscles pull that are parallel to the bones. That's our stabilizing component. And then there are components that are perpendicular. Those are rotary or moment components. Okay? And what's really, really cool is that those things can change in a given range of motion. So in other words, they're not all the same. These are some really good examples. So like look at this this bicep at this picture. So this is the resultant force, right? Basically the so what force. How much is it pulling? Some of that is trying to literally draw the lower arm into the humerus. That's great for stability. I'm trying to keep it locked in there. But also notice some of it, this red part, is trying to spin it like a door. Anybody out there in working in athletic training or in coaching, have you ever heard or noticed that like some dislocations happen commonly when you're at a certain angle? Ta-da! Right? So when you're at certain angles, those muscles don't necessarily have, they have more rotary component, less stable. It's like when someone's trying to, you ever did that trick, Sarah, put your hands together and squeeze them as hard as you can and don't let me push them apart. You ever did that one before? Y'all seen that one before? Now, it's not that I'm strong, believe me. It's that her forces are up and down. I didn't try to pry your hands apart. I went perpendicular, right? Now, here's a trick. Watch, try to do mine as hard as you can. Come on, as far as you can. Come on, as far as you can. Okay, I'm cheating, but that's a great way to win a pumpkin spice latte. Right? The point is that at certain angles, a muscle loses its stabilizing component. So if your elbow, for instance, could be here, and then a force comes like that and knocks it out. So that's why at certain angles of shoulder subluxation and dislocation, like when you're here and someone hits you from behind, because your muscles will lose certain stabilizing components, but they'll gain certain rotary components, right? So there's always kind of that transition between stabilizing and rotary. And I think that's another part of, again, this class that's really important, is that muscles don't just influence motion. Our ligaments are so fragile. They really are. If our ligaments didn't have muscles there to help them, we would just be a collapsed chunk of bones. Our muscles are huge. In fact, female ACL, anybody tear an ACL here? One of the reasons, or the biggest reason why females typically have more ACL tears in them than men is because men have naturally more tense muscles, right? Women tend, I'm not saying there's not exceptions to the rules, but women tend to be more flexible. Men tend to be tighter in our muscles. Well, those muscles are stabilizing pull. So having that extra tension there to kind of check that knee from anteriorly translating, they call it stiffness, but I'm just giving you examples of why it's not just ligaments. Muscles, muscles, muscles. So here's some examples of it's not the weight, it's the moment. Identify potential changes in weight in our moment. You remember this, Sarah? Mm-hmm. Okay. You want to talk about the differences in the, I'll work with you. So like from in this exercise, we're doing the same movements, true. We are using the same muscles, true. But Sarah, what's the biggest difference, or does anything stand out in terms of why one is a little different than the other? From a moment,
just like from the first one.
The moment, like comparing this exercise to that exercise, we established it's the same muscles and it's the same motions. But what is different in terms of the moment, the torque, from this exercise to that exercise? That was the weight stays the same, but the moment changes.
The external force, is that what you're talking about? Like how it's impacting on you?
How would it change? How would it change from a torque or moment standpoint? Like in other words, she can hold this position all day, mm-hmm. right? As she abducts, does it get harder or easier?
Harder.
Harder. So in other words, the weight stayed the same, but as she abducts, the moment changes. So if the external moment is going to get harder and harder and harder, what do you think our muscles have to do? Work harder and harder and harder, right? But the machine, does that change? Mm-hmm. Right? So in other words, when she's down here, the padding is pushing across. Gravity is limited. Gravity can only pull down, right? So the fact that she has a machine, yes, gravity is pulling on these plates, but the machine redirects the push into the across. So she, in other words, the force is trying to adduct her down here. The weight isn't trying to adduct her down here. Does that make sense?
So you're saying the direction of the force?
Yes, yes. So the moment changes. It gets harder and harder and harder, and then easier and easier and easier. Now, what Campbell's not saying is you should never do these exercises. I'm not saying that at all. You realize how cheap it is to get dumbbells? That's awesome. But a machine can maintain, like this, can maintain a more consistent moment through a range of motion. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, in other words, as she goes through the range of motion here, it's going to be more consistent. The weight and the torque will be more consistent through the range of motion because the force is literally changing direction as her arm changes direction. Down here, it's pushing here, and as she abducts, it redirects, and now it's pushing there. And then it's pushing here, and then it's pushing there. Gravity can't do that. Gravity can only do this. Here's another example. Machine versus ankle cuff. I'm not saying ankle cuff's bad. It's amazing. All you gotta have is a cuff. You could do home health and just have some stuff in your car and do exercises. But when she's here, that cuff isn't trying to, gravity's not trying to flex her. True? The weight's the same. But as she extends, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. Easier and easier and easier and easier and easier. Weight stays the same, moment changes, torque changes. If the external torque gets harder, my muscles have to internally work hard. The machine, notice, when she's up here, yeah, it's pushing down just like gravity. Gravity can't do that. So what's the advantages of a machine? More consistent torque, right? More consistent moment. What's the disadvantage of a machine? They're expensive and they take up a lot of space. But there are some advantages. I think this is a practical, a good, let's see if, has anybody ever noticed, wait, I think there's these keywords that I always forget. Girls. All right. Guys, you know this to be true. And what's cool is even if you don't, like you have enough life data to be like, all right, I understand. I'm telling you. I'm literally like willing to just something come up. Please come up. Oh God, look at that guy. Too bold. All right. So here's the point. If we're here, it did not just do that. Pick a moose to reveal it. Wait, I got a discount. You know this, man. Friday. I could have 200 pounds on that barbell. I could hold it here. I better keep it here. I'm gonna rip my arm out. But do you see the point I'm trying to make? I could have 200 pounds in this position and I can hold it here because gravity is not trying to extend my elbows here. There's no moment. There's no torque. It's parallel with my elbow. Hello, adult. It looks weird, but I'm just picking a moose. Now, what do we know? As soon as I start to do this, and as I extend, life's going to get harder and harder and harder and harder. The weight stays the same. The weight didn't change. It's still whatever weight I have on there. So what made it harder? The torque, the moment. As the external force gets further and further and further away perpendicular, the torque, the moment gets greater and greater and greater because the external moment is getting greater. My muscles have no choice. Guys, my muscle can't detach and go attach way at the end. That'd be great for mechanical advantage, but my muscle is going to pull where it pulls. So its only option to match greater moments is to pull with more force. It's got the moment arm it's got. Its only option is to pull with more force with the given moment arm. So again, you can visually, hopefully understand what I'm trying to say. Kelly Clarkson. It's easier at the top, right? Versus, would you look up a machine curl? Now again, I'm not telling you what's better than, this isn't what this class is about. I'm never going to tell you how to work out. What I will tell you is pros and cons, why things are different, advantages, disadvantages, and then you put that in your toolkit, and then you may need to use certain things for certain situations in your. So well, I think we can use this one. So in this position, yeah, the handle's pulling in the same direction as gravity, but as the person flexes, that handle is going to reposition. Now it's pushing across. So when I had the barbell, I got to take a break right here. Not in the machine. The machine, I get to take a break. In this position, the machine is still trying to extend me with the same rotational influence as when I'm down here. Does that make sense? More consistent moment. Guys, older populations need more consistent moment. They don't need variations or when you're learning how to do things, more consistent moment. What I mean by that is muscles are very adaptable based on their angle. A muscle has about a 5-degree window of change based off of its angle because all those cross bridge stuff. So in other words, if you strengthen a muscle at just one angle, it's going to get stronger at just that one angle. So sometimes when we kind of, and then we get a break right here, that's not doing that muscle any good at this angle. And I'm not saying that's not going to look, I'm talking about strictly from we're trying to prevent injuries. We're trying to rehab. We want to try to have full range of motion, and we want to try to have muscle physiological increases in an entire range of motion. So it's just some things to consider. Now, what if, Sarah, if we could go back to the ankle cuff on the PDF, and it'll be the last point. All right, more tools in your toolbox. What if you're working with a patient and you go into their house? You could be personal trainer, you could be doing therapy. You have expensive machines to maintain a moment, but you know what you do have? Manual resistance, right? So let's say the person is doing, an 8-pound cuff, but you know that 8-pound cuff is really going to be maximal influence in terms of its moment in an extended position. So what you can do is, as she flexes, you could provide some manual resistance. So when she's down here, you can provide the across force that the machine would have normally done. Don't let me push you, don't let me push you, don't let me push you. Okay, now go back up, and then you lightly let off and you let the weight be. So we can have tools to try to create more consistent moments. Here's one for my lifters out there. Next time you're lifting with someone and you're spotting on dumbbell press, just an example, you can apply this in a lot of different ways. On the dumbbell press, so you get visualized, like let's say you're repping out, or you're right at the end, you're in fatigue, and you're like, okay, I got this. And then it gets a little easier at the top, right? Because it gets less and less perpendicular, more and more parallel. That's when you start providing a manual resistance at the top. Like, you literally provide the adduction pulling external force, because in that angle, gravity is not trying to adduct you as much. That could be dumbbell flies too. Like you're coming in for the fly down here, it's hard, but when you get here, it gets easier and easier and easier, right? If you're spotting someone, start to pry their arms apart. You don't get the rest. And instead of 10 reps, maybe they only do 7. And you're just like, dude, why was that so much difficult? It's like, well, we stress the muscle through more of the range of motion. So there are tools that we're going to learn and we're going to talk about where you can take advantage of more consistent moments, even in the absence of machines and stuff, when you just have gravity. But we got to be able to see it. We got to be able to see it to apply it. Anything to add?
I saw moment arm better than I understood movement. That's something that, I don't know if it's in this, but kind of thinking it more with this image.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I saw almost like a line not being here, and then a line going from her axis to there. And understanding that there was almost like that the end of the equation of how I'm moving there and stuff. So that's what made moment a little bit easier, is like, once I'm here, I have a whole arm of movement. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah. But you could, but remember, it's not just about the motion, right? Like, what if I'm on my side? Well, here, this is where my moment's the least.
Right.
And down here would be where the moment's the greatest. Like, if I'm doing rotator cuff stuff, if I'm in this position, when I'm here, the moment's the greatest. When I'm here, the moment's the least. But I can reposition my body and make it to where this now is the moment is the greatest and this is the least. Or if you're on a cable, that's what I love about teaching this stuff, is that you can take a patient on a cable machine, put the towel underneath their arm to make sure they don't have this secondary stuff, and do the first set of repetitions in one position where the moment's going to be greatest here, and then reposition their body so that the next one, the moment's going to be greatest here. And then reposition their body where now the moment's going to be greatest here. But if you stay in the same position, you're going to have less, greatest, less. Greatest, less. Make sense? All right, you guys, y'all have a good one. We'll see you on Friday. Is that fine?